It's 9:30. We'll call this meeting to order. Can we start with a roll call vote, please?
Mayor Larry Milton,
Here.
City Administrator Stan Dobbins,
Here.
Alderman Bill Skanes,
Here.
Alderman Jamie Whitus,
Here.
Brian Casaboom,
Here.
Melissa Still.
Here.
Mayor, we have a quorum.
Thank you. First item on the agenda is approval of the Human Resource Committee minutes for December 15th, regular meeting. Any questions or comments on those?
No, sir.
If not, I will entertain a motion to approve.
So move. Second.
Motion is second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Ayes have it. Next on the agenda is the staff report, Human Resource Committee by Jan.
Mayor.
Morning, Jan.
Good morning. We're talking about, on this particular item, we're talking about the turnover rate for 2021. Get this up here so you can hear me. They make these for shorter people, I think.
I heard an objection from the audience. May I hear a second?
So we can get this up a little higher. Actually, turnover was down a little bit in 2021. It was down it was down about a little over 1%. So a little over 13 and change percent turnover. And understanding that not all turnover is bad. You know, we had 4 retirements this past year. And so that's a good way to honor those that have put in their service over a number of years, and then we just rehire to fill those positions. To go through on a case-by-case or department-by-department breakdown, overall, police department was down just a little bit from 2020. They had a pretty ugly year in 2020, so it was down from that. Utilities was flat for 2021, but when you look at the statistics, and Kimberly, if you'd bring up that one on the 5-year trend. You can see that utilities has a consistent high level of turnover. You know, from one year to the next, it'll be 12, 20, 19, and so on. It's a fairly significant percentage. And I think ultimately, on the next item, whenever we talk about the staffing study, hopefully in that process, we can kind of drill down and understand some of the roots of those issues that drive that high of a turnover rate. That being said, when you go, and I apologize, my voice is still a little rough. Round 2 of COVID just kicked me in the rear end, and it was one of those that I still haven't got my voice back yet. Fire was down slightly from 2020, and for a large department, they still remain relatively low overall. It's not a huge problem with turnover in the fire department. Public Works and Engineering, they saw a reduction in turnover. Parks and Recreation had a slight uptick, but most of them were in the operations side, where we had in the office area where people were, we lost a few folks in that area, not in the staff areas where we had maintenance workers and things like that. It wasn't as big an issue over there. Planning and Development was up, with the loss being in the building inspector positions. Finance was flat from 2020, and I have an error in in my staff report. The city clerk courts department, that was actually down just a little bit. They had 3 the prior year. They lost 3 employees, and it was down to 1 last year. Human Resources, we lost 1. We lost our safety officer this past year, and we're not going to be refilling that one anytime soon. Administration and IT remained flat last couple of years. So that's our overall turnover rate, and we'll answer any questions you might have.
Jan, do you have a reason or an understanding of why the utilities would be so high?
I don't at this point. I understand, based on anecdotal information, that schedules end up being a big deal. You know, whenever people are relegated to the night shift forever and ever, that becomes a challenge for some people that have families and that want to participate in their kids' events and things like that. So that is one contributor. And that's one of the things that whenever we go through the interview and selection process, we specifically hone in on day shift versus night shift and things like that, and ask those questions. Is this going to be a big factor to you? I think ultimately, even though most employees say, oh, no, it's not going to be a problem, I think it is a problem. So that's one of the things I think, hopefully, whenever we go through our staffing study, we can come to understand what some of those reasons might be.
And in the city clerk court legal, is that, have we eliminated positions, or is that percentage higher because it's based on a small number?
Well, it is based on a small number for one thing, but I believe we did drop a position last year. We had a
It's frozen, a frozen position.
frozen position, okay. We didn't actually drop it, but we froze it, yeah. And we just haven't refilled it.
So when we do the exit interviews, we don't track, like, do you track why they say that they're leaving, or?
We do.
Okay.
However, we don't get the straight information all the time. We get it about half of the time with respect to people don't want to burn bridges. When they leave, they don't tell us exactly why they're leaving. Some people do, but other people just, well, I'd rather not say. I'd just rather move on. And you know, they're saying, I got a better job, better opportunity, things like that. The real reason, it's going to be difficult to understand sometimes because, you know, assistant city administrator, he meets with them. I meet with them as well. And sometimes we get different stories.
Yeah, I can see that, not wanting to burn bridges, right? If they say why they're honestly leaving, and then they go hire, and then whoever they're interviewing with contacts the city, right? Yeah.
Was any of it having anything to do with the wage issues that we tried to rectify at our last meeting for the first reading?
I will say, in some respects, based on anecdotal information I get from utilities, wages is a problem.
I was reading somewhere the other day, Mayor, one of the fast food places in town was going to start their people off at $17 an hour.
Yep.
Wow.
The one
of fries are
issue
going up.
that with respect to like utilities, some of those equipment operator type positions that we have, you know, we'll pay $17, $18 an hour, and in construction, you can get $21, $22, $25 an hour. So that becomes a big challenge. They start looking at the dollar sign of the paycheck. And, you know, in some respects, single individuals, unmarried individuals, no family, they're a little more transient. They do chase the dollar more. And the benefits side of things, which our benefit package is $6, $7, $8 an hour, depending upon what you choose, you know, they don't see that as a huge benefit.
Do you track it by, like, their classification? So are we losing more people to lower classification positions versus higher positions, or?
Are we losing lower classification? Yes,
Yeah.
we do track that, and we do lose more lower classification proportionally than higher classification.
Right, like, I would be interested to see that, like, if it's, what's the base, 11C now?
Yeah.
If it tends to be there, if it's somewhere in the middle, if it's, I mean, that would just be interesting to see, if it's perhaps a growth issue.
On one of the attachments that you see here, there's no statistical information attributed by position, by classification, but you can see anecdotally what the positions are that left.
Do you think if it is lower classifications that are leaving, perhaps there's something that we could implement, maybe such as career path, cross-training, things like that, that may keep them on longer because they feel like there is growth potential, or they're still increasing their skills and they don't stall out and quit and just chase after the dollar. Because I don't think everyone is always leaving just to make more money. A lot of times it's because there is no growth potential for them. We're not a huge organization, and I understand that. Not everyone can move up through the ranks, but I'm wondering, and perhaps this is something that we look at in the staffing study, if there aren't other values that we can add for our employees to keep them on longer.
Well, and that's part of the reason whenever we developed the compensation plan for police and fire, we developed those built-in ways to promote themselves, to get them better compensation based on the skills that they bring to the table. That being said, one other big factor that we don't always get across the board is that we haven't, most of our employees do not live within the city limits of Branson. And so whenever you're living in Ozark, Nixa, and places like that, a lot of the jobs that are available are those that are available up there, and it's closer to home, so their commute time is less and things like that. That becomes an intangible aspect of the search that money isn't a big factor.
At $3 a gallon, it adds up.
Well, it would, yeah, but time is also a big factor as well.
That's a really good point. I'm just thinking out of the box. I can see how single employees wouldn't place as much value on our benefit package as maybe the middle and the upper level of employee that has family. So just throwing this out there, is there a way we could consider for maybe giving the employees an option for the single employees, basically? Because I could see the dollar being much more important to them. And if they're not placing the value, which I can understand, we were all young and single at one time, maybe they could get an extra couple dollars an hour in lieu of them choosing to not receive certain benefits.
I've done that in the past, so yes, it is possible.
How was that received by the employee?
Typically for the entry-level employee, they love it.
Yeah. So would you make sure that that's included in our staffing study?
Absolutely.
Because I could see the value in that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And then you see overall, resignation ends up being the lion's share, 87% of our staff that leaves, 10% through retirement. We don't get very many involuntary separations. And fortunately, we have had 0 deaths for a while, so keep
If
up.
you look at the trend over a period of time, they're looking kind of consistent from one year to the next. I mean, little ups and downs and blips, but seem to be pretty consistent.
It is fairly consistent in that anywhere, it ranges in my tenure here from 9 to 14%, somewhere in that range. And it'll vary from year to year, but it won't be dramatically different. And sometimes, it ends up being somebody is just looking for a better job, and other times it's going to be retirement. It's just going to be a mix of things depending upon individual needs and individual values.
In certain bureaucracies, it certainly was that. The state, I was grade 18, step 6 out of 24, 4 years without a raise as a state employee. And you look out for other opportunities at the top that are stacked with managers, assistant managers, and supervisors, they're going nowhere.
Right.
And they stagnate, and they want to move on and get a better job. And I can't fault them. It hurts us a little bit, needless to say, but I can't fault them.
Right. And that's part of the reason why my department wants to put together a clear succession planning mechanism so that we understand what growth potentials are and things like that, so that we can have options and choices along the way, and we can mentor people and get them to grow over the years that they're here. And then whenever you get to a certain point, like for example, the fire department and their compensation requests, whenever we're going through the IAFF conversations, they're wanting a limited number of steps to their compensation. They want to top out quickly. And, it's just based on the limited amount of time they expect to be in a position. You know, so.
Very physically demanding.
Exactly. Any other questions?
I just want to make a comment. I think it's great that in 2021, you saw 65% of the positions being filled by internal promotion.
Ideally, I'd like to get up to 70 to 80% of that and pull some of those in. But then there's going to be some times whenever you do need fresh blood, if you will, into the system. You get people that bring in new ideas and things like that, because that's where you see new ways to doing things. And you know, one of the things we have a tendency to do whenever you get ingrained in a process over time is that's the way we've always done it, and you have a tendency to not look for innovative ideas.
Have we started sending people to conferences again?
I don't believe so. I think there may be some on a limited basis, but a widespread, I don't believe that we've done a lot of that. We have? Okay, we have.
We have.
Not in my department, but.
Okay. I mean, I think that's important too for bringing in new ideas. I mean, you can learn so much in just a single day's conference. And I also think it's a really great incentive if we could include other people that traditionally wouldn't be going to those conferences, because it would be professional growth for them too. And maybe that could be something that isn't particularly costly for the city, but will help with that internal promotion and also widening their knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't disagree with that. There's going to be times, like in our HR group, we've got a local HR association that staff goes to those meetings on a regular basis. Sometimes, you know, they're monthly, and sometimes they get a little stale, a little like, okay, what's next? But then sometimes, you know, especially when we have outside legal counsel come in and give us the scary news of what the landscape looks like, and you wonder why you're in HR to begin with at that point, because the laws are changing all the time. And, you know, it's good to be able to have some of that thing going on.
Jen, just one last question. I know that they used to send us to training for certificates. I'd go for at least 2 weeks a year with Office Inspector General, learning how to read and do audits and audit resolutions and human resources issues and state and federal statutes. Are those offered by the state in training for certificates that could be utilized to show that they furthered their education?
There's some, you know, like with respect to the DNR and things like that, we have staff that they go to specific trainings through DNR that, you know, for A license, B license, C license, and so on. Or I should say it in reverse order: D license, C license, B license, and A license being the top of the pinnacle at that point. And so they do offer those, and we do pay for employees to go to those things, because they're, you know, several days at a time, a lot of classroom hours and things like that.
Stan, do we ever recognize those employees for reaching those levels of competency?
They are, yeah.
Okay.
Generally, it's done within the city. Like right now, there's a program I'll speak about, well, what Jan talked about with utilities. We have people in a training program to get to that level. Once they receive that level, they are recognized by the department, by the city as a whole. The police department right now, their supervisors are going through a program with FBI LEDA that requires certain training courses, and once they reach that, they are recognized as well. We put those in the newsletter along with when those get sent out also.
I'm wondering if some public acknowledgement, if we included that, if that would add a little bit of a boost to their recognition.
Sure. If John would quit talking up there, would you have Melody pick up on that?
The one other thing with respect to utilities department in particular, whenever you get to a certain level of classification, they have what they refer to as ad pay. So you actually get additional compensation once you reach this certain level. It's an incentive-based program that rewards people for achieving those levels and maintaining those levels.
Thank you for clarifying that. I think it's important for the staff member. I keep my old certificates, throw darts at them periodically. But I think they just showed what sort of growth that we had to go through. I mean, we received the training from the IG, the Department of Labor, Human Services, just a myriad of activities out there for learning how to do a myriad of things. And we never were given a raise out of it.
Well, the
Just
one
part of the
thing,
job. Yeah.
the one thing that we also do is we do tuition reimbursement. So employees can take college-level courses, and the city will reimburse up to 100% of that, 6 hours at a time. Now, if you depend solely on that, you'll be retired by the time you actually graduate. So the employees are kicking in some themselves, the city is kicking in some themselves. We've got anywhere at one time 6 to 8 employees taking advantage of that, and they're all levels of the organization that they're doing that. We've got some that are getting their master's degree. We've got a police officer, a police sergeant getting a master's degree. We've got other folks getting various degrees, bachelor's degrees, things like that. So they're able to enhance their own skill set. When we go through that, the one thing is it has to be a job, a degree that's focused for something here with the city of Branson. So like if you want to get a degree in ancient French literature, we don't really have a big demand for that here. So that probably wouldn't be a thing that we would reimburse employees for.
Jan, do you know how that issue and several others, how that's budgeted in our annual budget?
That's out of my budget. Generally, $20,000 annually is what
So you do an estimate of what we expect, or what we anticipate for these reimbursements to cost?
Right, exactly.
Do you always spend that amount, or is there money left over at the end?
Sometimes we've gone a little extra on that. So, but yeah, we try to use all of it. There's going to be some years, it just depends on demand. But some years we've used all of it, and then some years it's been pretty close. Other years it might be a little short, so, yeah.
Are we encouraging employees to use that? Or
Absolutely.
do they know how to
Absolutely.
access it? Okay.
Yeah.
And then I think my other question would be, in the years that there's money left over, is there potential maybe to open that up? So say someone got straight A's on their, like they did very well, right? Because I think the lowest grade that you can get is a C to get reimbursement, and then it's only a partial reimbursement,
Right.
correct? Okay. So if someone gets 100% reimbursement, they're doing very well in school, can we maybe, if there's money left over, incentivize them and offer additional reimbursement?
We haven't discussed that.
Okay. I mean, I would be interested in that, because if you've got someone that's performing very well, perhaps we can, if there's budget left over, incentivize them further and help them to move along in their process quicker.
I just, whatever we would do in that respect, I'd want to figure out a way that makes it fair and equitable.
Of course.
Because ultimately, to get somebody that went through it last year and they wouldn't get it, that kind of thing, so. A lot of
Jan,
issues.
You have me intrigued, and I'm really glad that we're doing this. The departments that normally take advantage of this, is there any particular department that takes more advantage, whose employees take greater advantage of that? Police, fire, water.
I
sewer,
would
fiscal?
say it's kind of balanced. You've got a lot of utilities and police and fire, yeah. It's fairly balanced.
Okay.
I took advantage of it to get my master's. Good for you. I mean, I think it's a huge benefit, and any time that we can offer additional assistance, it would be great. It would have been something that I would have loved to have had, even just the opportunity to get additional benefits, because I didn't want to take just, 6 credit hours every year, because it would have taken me a long time to get 39 hours. So I just think it's a really great added benefit.
Well, a lot of times whenever I'm talking to folks about this tuition reimbursement piece, you know, I give them my experience, you know, it's like, okay, you know, if you take classes in the summertime, it goes a lot faster, you do a lot less work, you know, I'm just, you know, try to give them as many pointers as I can with respect to how to get through this as quickly as possible.
One last question, I'm sorry, you really piqued my interest, I really like it, and I appreciate her comments. Will we utilize an OTC for any of this to get the prerequisites out of the way, which are half the cost of going to a four-year institution?
A lot of employees do that. They recognize that, you know, we reimburse up to the rate that MSU pays for their coursework, be it a bachelor's degree or a master's degree. And MSU's recently changed their pricing structure. It's kind of like everything's all the same price now, whether it's online or on campus kind of thing. And so to that extent, you know, we pay up to that amount. Now, employees don't get up to that amount reimbursed if they go to OTC, because OTC is so much cheaper. But overall, it costs them a lot less.
Yeah.
Generally, a third to half or somewhere in that range.
Thank you.
You bet.
You move on?
Yeah, let's move on. Okay, the thing I want to talk about now is I want to use this panel as kind of my focus group, if you will, on establishing the criteria for what we want to do with respect to a staffing study and the compensation study as well. I mean, there's a lot of things that we're going to have to do, but we have to establish some specific benchmarks and goals and things like that, because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to just say, well, let's just go do this and see where it lands, that kind of thing. We want to focus on, like I have in my staff report here, we want to originate with questions or problems to solve. And that becomes kind of the basis of what we want to do. What do we want to do? The question that I have listed, or questions I have listed already are important functions, city functions, are they staffed appropriately? We need to be able to answer that question. You know, do we have one department that's overstaffed and another department that's understaffed? We got to answer that. And are employees paid appropriately? That's something that we need to answer. Do we pay the rate that we want to pay? And that then kind of necessitates kind of another question is multiple choice. As a group, what do we want to do? Do we want to pay at market? Do we want to be a market leader? Or do we want to be a market follower? Ultimately, that's going to be your guidance that I'm looking for in that respect. Where do we want to be with that? It's an important question, because if we are going to be a market leader, then we need to know what our market's going to look like. Is our market going to be Springfield, Nix, Ozark, or is it going to be like what we did on our last salary study, where we asked the department directors to give us those particular departments that they compete with, and then we go out and check those particular salaries and compensation levels. And when I say compete with, you know, like in utilities, you know, do we, you know, like Harrison, in years past, we had always taken a set number of cities that we have compared ourselves to, and Harrison was one of them. Well, Harrison doesn't really compete in the same market as utilities does, simply because their water treatment, their water acquisition process is totally different. And their skill level and all this is all totally different than what we have. So that's why we leveraged what the departments, what they saw were similarities, and how we went forward with that and did a comparison. So ultimately, I'd like to do something similar to that, to do that and broadcast that net out there and say, Police, who do you compete with? Fire, who do you compete with? Finance, who do you compete with? And so on. Those are the kinds of things that I want to understand. You know, what are the factors that affect our compensation levels that we need to be cognizant of? And so that way, we're getting an accurate number or whatever it is we're going to be looking at with respect to the compensation levels.
Are you talking about looking at other areas like Wisconsin Dells and our competing markets up on the East Coast? It's very similar to our size. It generates that type of activity?
I think for some departments, that's accurate. That's a good way to do things, but not for all. You know, it just depends on, you know, like for police and fire, do they have the same population? Do they have the same influx of visitors and things like that? Those are the things we'd want to take a hard look at and say, are they comparative in that nature that makes sense? So I guess what I'd like to do is ask this panel, what do you think? What are your goals that you want to articulate? You know, are we staffed appropriately? Are we what level do you want to pay at? Do you want to be at market? Do you want to be a market trailer? I don't think we necessarily want to be a market trailer because then we would have turnover big time.
No, we're into the situation we're in now, and the reason we're having these discussions, if we continue to digress or regress.
Jan, I think it's also important, when we look at our competitive wage to other, our competitors out there. Some of our competitors would be municipalities, many others would be the private sector. So when I look at our city payroll, and we often have discussions, well, this level is getting paid $17 an hour, and they could go work for another company that pays them $19 an hour. So for $2 an hour more, family responsible to put food on their table, they may have a lot of loyalty here, but they have more loyalty to their family.
Right.
So we have discussions at that level. When we look at what we don't do is say, well, I know we're paying 17 and Nix is paying 19, but there's a inherent $6, $7, $8 an hour in benefits, right?
Right.
So, and I'm going to suggest, I think, that we have some employees that take full advantage of all the benefits we offer and really appreciate it, and even maybe factor in the benefits in addition to their hourly wage. I have to believe there are some employees that don't take advantage of all the benefits, and that would trade out some benefits for the hourly. So if we're paying, just use round numbers, if it's $7 an hour equivalent for benefits, if the employee could receive $2 or $3 an hour more in lieu of the benefits, on the surface, that sounds like it's a win-win. The city would then have the ability to reduce our total compensation expense, and the employee would be receiving more to take home on a weekly basis.
Right. Yeah, and that's one of those things that I think, you know, an illustration of that has to do with our health savings account. You know, for years we had the PPO plan that everybody participated in. Well, the first year we offered the health savings account, very few people participated. And we're seeing growth year over year, and we're up to close to 30% of our staff use the health savings account. They see that as, okay, I'm not one who normally uses my insurance, so if I stick with a PPO plan and I don't use it, Anthem gets that money, and I have nothing to show for it at the end of the year. Whereas with a health savings account, I've actually got money in my account that the city contributed. So it's that kind of concept, absolutely.
And I think there's many layers of this, but there could be a family, husband or wife, where the spouse has insurance with their employer. There's no reason for the employee not to take advantage of what the city's offering for health insurance. Where if in that example, if they had a choice, well, my spouse has great insurance, and if I could receive X number of dollars an hour more, that would benefit my family.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, those are the things that, we can look at and make sure we incorporate in whatever kind of compensation schedule we want to develop. Thinking a little bit out of the box, so to speak.
Yeah.
So I have a little bit of heartburn with the notion that we go straight to department directors, and each department is picking and choosing which cities that they are comparing us to. Because there could be a number of reasons why we're losing people to cities. If we have, say, firefighters that are moving to another city to be another firefighter, then that might be an example of why, across the board, they just pay better and they're leaving because of that reason. But if it's because of promotions and we lose a couple people to a specific city because there's more opportunity for advancement there, that's not always necessarily a good benchmark to follow. What I would like to see from the study is it to be performed more as an audit, where we maybe limit our picking and choosing which cities we're looking at. Because if we're paying a company, a third party, probably $50,000, $60,000 to do a study, they're going to recognize that there are going to be things that make Branson unique, that there are reasons why we're maybe losing people to other cities. But I don't know that it would be fair if everyone's just picking and choosing which specific cities they want to be compared to. So, before they went on with that, maybe this committee could review the cities that they've chosen and why they've chosen them. I think maybe that would be a good check, just to make sure that it's fair and it's equitable.
You're saying exactly what I said earlier. I want this group to be the focus group.
Right.
That validates that information, because ultimately, we have to have a validation level, and that's what I would rely on you folks to do, is say, yep, this makes sense, and nope, this doesn't make sense, kind of thing. Absolutely.
No, that's an excellent point.
Yeah, there was a portion of it, I think, where you said that your internal staff would do some analysis, and I think we just need to make it more of an audit. Keep our staff out of it as much as possible, so there can't be finger pointing or anything like that, and just let the third party do their job, and then like you said, we can act as oversight of it.
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree more, because the thing about it is, to your point, let's say I've always done something in human resources this way, and there's new innovative ways to do it, and it's like, well, by golly, this is the way we're going to do it, and maybe there's a whole lot better way to do it. And that outside influence to say, if we go into this with any kind of preconceived outcomes, we're wasting our time and money.
Yeah. Yeah.
I agree, and it's taught in political science 1001 in college. It's called the bureaucratic imperative. You make it, it's a box, and you cut off all communications going in or out for 10 years, and you open it back up, it does the same thing. That is the nature of the bureaucracy. I have been involved with those. Wholeheartedly agree. I would like to also look at what we had called and referred to as internal structure buoyancy, is that it tends to set its levels itself based upon what the needs of the community are.
Right.
And I don't know who'd provide that input back to that individual doing this particular audit, but there are certain needs that are necessary within an organization to be executed that doesn't need to be part of saying, well, that needs to change. That's got to be set in there structurally. That's set in there by the state. That's set in there by ordinance.
Absolutely.
Et cetera, et cetera. And then outside of that, let it go the way the best that it can. But the bureaucracy tends to set its own internal structure based upon needs that's been dictated by the mayor and board of aldermen and state statute. So I'm just throwing that part in as well.
Right.
And then there's going to be inherent things that on the surface may not be considered, but the police department for a minute, I think there's a value, not a dollar-to-dollar value, but there is a value to be a police officer in Branson with the respect and admiration that our police department receives. That does carry value to our police officers if we're looking at communities that don't necessarily show the respect and appreciation. It's so that work environment, if you will, does have a factor. In the work environment within our own city, collaborating on ideas when we make changes within the city, have the employees be more part of that decision-making process. I think there is an untold amount of value and benefit and resources within our 250 employees that I would like to see engaged more because my experience in the private sector says they're the ones who really have the ideas of what can be improved, what can be changed, and soliciting their input does several things. One is, I think some real pearls will come to the surface that we may not know because they're the ones in the trenches doing the work. And it also increases the morale when we listen to their input and they get buy-in to why certain changes or certain processes are done. When they get buy-in, there's not a dollar value on that, but there's sure a morale value on that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Those are the kinds of things that whenever you move somebody in different positions and they don't understand why, that becomes a morale deficit, if you will. You have to talk to them and make sure they understand the value of these things. Understanding that whenever we do any kind of staffing study or anything like that, the one thing I want to make sure that we get across the board and clear to everybody is this is not an endeavor to reduce any staff.
That's right.
To reduce any pay, to do anything like that. Because typically, what happens is whenever you start doing those kinds of things, it's kind of like the man is out to get me, and we don't want to do that. We want full participation. Because, some of the organizations where you've got employees that are introspective about themselves and say, I could do a better job at this if I had this tool. I'm not doing as good a job as I could do because I don't have the training I need, and those kinds of things. But that takes a level of confidence and of not being afraid that, if I recognize that I'm insufficient at this, they might look to fire me.
That's right.
And that's the kind of thing I want to totally abate and get rid of and say, we're not trying to get rid of anybody. We're not trying to reduce staff, reduce pay, do anything like that.
My 40 years' experience as a business owner, it's clear to me that when we're talking about compensation, here we're talking about dollars, that the morale and the dollars go hand in hand. Heard a saying many years ago that a typical employee will work at a job that they dislike if the pay is good enough. Other employees will work at a job for less pay if they love doing what they're doing. No employee is going to work at a job with less pay and they don't enjoy what they're doing.
Right.
So the morale factor, I think, is a very, very important component when we do this whole staffing study.
Right. And frankly, we also need to understand that, if our internal needs or wants, or let's just classify them as needs. If our internal needs are at a Cadillac level and we've got a budget for it, we're not going to get very far. So we need to make sure that we identify those kinds of things and be willing to do something about it.
The issue
Excuse
of...
me a second.
Go ahead, bud.
You mentioned Yugos. You know why Yugos have heated rear windows?
I don't.
So when the pieces of crap stop working, your hands will stay warm as you're pushing it. Go ahead.
That's funny. The issue of templates, this is not the first time something like this is done.
Right.
Has been done, and you're an expert in the field. Are there devices out there and instruments that can be utilized without totally reinventing the wheel? And because all the things that we're saying other communities surely have said.
Right.
The approval of such an instrument for review would be where within this scope? Would it come back to us after somebody's selected? We all look at it and we design, you know where I'm going with that? There has to be an approval process.
I got you. Ultimately, what we want to do is we want to identify what are the key elements that we want to achieve. And then we go out and we solicit bids for this kind of thing, and we get the participants that are interested in doing it. And frankly, it's going to be mostly fairly large organizations that would be interested in a project like this, and and have the resources to be able to get it done in a short time frame. That being said, we would have those folks come in, make their presentations to this body, and then this body would then make the choice. That's what I would look at. And so part of what we have here is we have, as an addition to one of the handouts or attachments here, is we've got a grading scale that we would recommend that you incorporate. That you say, okay, this is how I would value this particular vendor, and say, I'll score it. It's a score sheet, if you will. And so, once we're kind of through this list of things, then we can take a look at that as well.
Last question on this, and I've said that a couple of times, and I apologize. The issue of approval for expenditure, would that be floated from this group back to the mayor and board of aldermen as you give a presentation to expend this amount of money?
Oh, absolutely, because I'll tell you right now, I don't have 50 or 60,000 or whatever the price is going to be in my budget to do this. And so we're going to have to come up with it.
So just for clarity, this board is going to be your sounding board, and then this board will make a recommendation to the Board of Aldermen.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And there on that first point, so we are asking important city functions staffed appropriately, are employees paid appropriately, and then are we also looking at morale and employee engagement as part of that? Is that what you were getting at, Mayor?
Absolutely, yes. I think
Okay. Okay.
that's equally important as the pay.
Okay.
And then that's something that we can track going forward.
Yeah. Stan?
Well, and actually what Melissa just talked about is probably what has changed so drastically over the past, I'll say 20 years, because of the generational differences with the millennials and the Gen Xers becoming more of the actual daily workforce. Their morale is different than quite frankly, than my morale. And my generation was known as, we're nuts, we're loyal, we stay with our employers. So now companies are having to draft these questions, so to speak, to be where each generation is responding appropriately. So we need to make sure that we have someone that is modern, so to speak, in the field to get that done.
It's a great point. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, and our goals, again, ensure that we are staffed appropriately for each area of function, whatever that's going to be, if that's going to be police, fire, parks, whatever it is, because we have to understand what our primary focuses are going to be. Pay employees appropriately. Again, I'll go back to the question, would you prefer to be at market in pay, a pay leader, or a pay follower? It's a simple question. As a body, what would you recommend? Because that's going to be kind of a foundational piece to move forward with.
I'd like to get everybody's opinion on that. I think we should be above average when you factor in hourly and benefits.
Okay.
I don't know it's realistic to say we want to be above average on the hourly, and oh, by the way, there's also $7 an hour worth of benefits.
Okay.
That's one opinion. I'd like to hear others.
I mean, I think that's a good point. Yeah, I think it's something that needs to be considered. And as I understood it, it is both a salary and a benefits study, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Well, I mean, it's all going to be all together.
Yeah, so we're examining, I think, all of that.
Yeah,
but
Jan's question is, from the board, he's looking for direction of what is our goal? Do we want to end up below, at, or above market rates out there?
I think it's fair, because in the end, they will end up with more in their pocket if we have great benefits, if they're not paying as much out of pocket to go see their doctor. But that needs to be something that's communicated very clearly, and that we can actually back up when we tell our employees that. Otherwise, they might look at another city where someone's making a couple dollars more an hour and think,
That's right. But at the end of the day, we want what Jan's asking, I believe, is what is our goal that we're shooting for? At the end of the day, is our goal to be at market rates or above market rates? He's asking if we want to be below, and I'm
well,
going
I
to veto
mean,
that one.
ideally, but I think it all comes down to budget. It's what we can afford. Unfortunately, it's going to be our biggest restriction on that.
But a goal that we're
So,
shooting for would.
absolutely.
Yeah, would be,
Absolutely.
any other input on that?
Let me throw something in on it. This is the one that I've been dealing with the last 42 years. That's the issue of workforce. And what we're seeing is a diminishing workforce. Us baby boomers that are coming out of the market, there were a huge amount of us, Larry, that were born. My parents, both sides, Mama and Papa had 11 kids, and Mom and Dad had 8 or 9. And we're having 2 or 3, so we're seeing a depressed amount of people out there. And what we're hearing back out of the surveys that were given to the people at the career centers all across the United States is that they're looking at something different. They want to be wanted. They want to be felt like they're listened to. They want something that's attractive to them, and the money is good, but they want to feel like they're contributing, which is a whole lot different than us boomers. A whole lot different. And that's all across the United States. I just got a text message email from Marty Leathers at the statewide level, and we've been preaching this stuff for 20 years. We could see it coming down the pike. Now it's being recognized by the manufacturing side. Boy, we better change the way we deal with our aesthetics as far as manufacturing, be it quiet or commercial or dirty manufacturing, whatever. They're looking at the intangibles, and they will walk off a job in a New York minute to take another $1 an hour somewhere else that they feel like they're appreciated. And I think it's the intangibles.
Yeah, there's a whole set of dynamics that you want to look at, because sometimes, I've worked in environments where men wore suits and ties all the time.
Yep.
And it's like, oh my gosh, that really makes you productive.
It's a Perry Mason show,
Yeah, and then I've worked in environments where there was a foosball table outside my office. It's like, kind of like to go back to that, just saying. But it's going to be the environment. What do we want to provide? And that lends itself back to this is the way we've always done it. So sometimes we may have to take a hard look at how we do things.
Well, some companies are bringing in pizzas, or of all things, like I've been trying to get Larry to do, is bring ribs to the meeting. He had greater attendance, he wouldn't want to do that. But there's food and there's little things that they do for employees that we could budget in if need be to provide. That's part of the aesthetics that helps the situation out.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Flexible hours, that's one thing.
Sure.
Significant time off, those kinds of things, where you give people projects and things like that they can complete, and that's their job, and they completed it. You give them a deadline, but the hours to get it done between now and then, okay, it's up to them, as opposed to a structure kind of thing. So there's a myriad of things we can look at, and obviously in police and fire, those are far more traditional in nature simply because they have to be, and utilities as well. But for different organizations, it's just, okay, we've got this job to do, let's get it done.
Yeah, I don't think we actually necessarily need to be the leader, the top of it, but it's what we can do, all these outside-the-box ideas.
Yeah.
I've got 2 adult children now. I don't know if they would be considered millennial, Generation X, whatever it is, but I know they're off my payroll now, so I appreciate that. But I know in both their situations in the companies, they're both out of college, and they're unique because they've actually still got the same job that they hired onto out of college, and so they've got some years with that now. But it's the different little added things like the flexible spending account. I've got one of them does that. That's great for a young single person, and to be able to do that. So just, I think it's more of, we have a beautiful area here. Is there other ways we can incentivize, partnerships with different ways to, to help, other benefits like that just because of the area we're in. So I think it's a lot of these outside the box ideas that that would help with that.
I want to ask a question. It's probably going to seem a little random, but when was the last time that anyone up here was inside a classroom, like say a second grade classroom? Recently?
Used to do it all the time, but it's been years.
So when I was in second grade, it was just desk after desk, and you had your name on that place, and that's where you sat every day. In my son's second grade classroom now, there are no desks. There are tables, there's a couch, there's different cushions for them to sit on. So, I mean, it's flexibility, right? I mean, my generation, millennial here, I had some of that, but not as much as the people that we're getting ready to start hiring. So everything that I think everyone's saying, it's just reinforced. If we can get ahead of that curve now and be leaders in that area, it's going to help benefit us.
Excellent point.
Yeah, I suspect the first grade teachers of today would have a coronary if they saw my first grade teacher tape me to my chair.
It's different, yeah.
That mental note is disturbing,
Okay, let's move on.
Okay. Anyhow,
Well, did that answer your questions, Jan?
it did,
Okay.
thank you. And I'll assume Gina is taking copious notes over there. That'll be in the next meeting. Again, I want to focus on eliminating any kind of preconceived outcomes. Anytime you go into a study like this, you don't know what you don't know. If you already know it, then you're wasting your time and money, that kind of thing. The last one, use findings to make necessary or transformative changes. If we're going to go through this, then ultimately we need to have the backbone to make the changes, or else why do it? It gets down to, if we see this department is understaffed or it's overstaffed or whatever, we need to make those changes. And again, going back to the not eliminating jobs or anything like that, but it's one of those deployment of assets. How do we take care of the business we need to take care of? We need to have the backbone to get it done. And, some of it, to Melissa's point earlier, a lot of it is going to depend on budget. And if we have a Cadillac taste or champagne taste and a beer budget kind of thing, that's the kind of thing that we need to understand. We may not be able to do it in 1 year or 2 years. It may take 3 or 4 years. We need to come up with that kind of game plan as well.
Can I also make a comment on this? I saw a post, and I think there was even an article on it, but we just made a pretty significant staffing change, did we not?
As far as?
I thought that we shifted some people around.
Oh, creating a new department, yeah.
Yeah. Can I make a suggestion, and this is just my personal opinion, that we try to limit making those changes while we're going through this process? Because now we have a whole new department that maybe isn't going to be completely functioning at the point of doing the staffing study, and so I'm worried that it may have some impact on the outcome of it.
That's fair. That's absolutely fair.
Yep.
Okay. That being said, Kimberly, if you would, let's just bring up that, this is a lot of information here. I'm not going to go through everything in here, but ultimately, this is kind of the pathway that I would recommend that we follow. We take to our specific vendors of choice and say, we want to incorporate some of these elements. Ultimately, we're looking at them to be the experts at it. I haven't done a staffing study in a number of years, so some of the things that I've done here, that I've listed here, may be out of date or maybe something that we don't necessarily want to do. But I think it's a good starting point for us to look at with respect to making sure that we include all key players in the process. To Melissa's point earlier, that, we need to make sure that, that folks have a voice and can say, this is how we do this. This is how, most of our, for an example, in finance, maybe the customers come in at this time of day and not at this time of day. Maybe we structure things a little differently. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there. But it's things like that that we involve people at all levels so that they can say, this doesn't make sense for my department, but it might make sense for yours.
I think that is key.
And then we would develop benchmarks, in my mind, benchmarks for service. And I think I would rely much more heavily on the departments themselves to develop what those are. And then this body here might say, I don't necessarily agree with this benchmark, or maybe the administration doesn't agree with this benchmark. Maybe they want to see something different. Maybe they want to see more taken on or less taken on, that kind of thing. So that way, that would then affect what our staffing needs would be.
Yep, and I think that's just the value of collaboration, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So we've got this laid out over phases. Again, I'm not going to bore you with all of the details, but there's a lot of information here. You might review it, and we'll go through it, whenever we meet with any prospective vendors and things like that, and have this as kind of a backdrop. Are we hitting this mark? Are we hitting that mark? Are we going to do this? Are we going to do that? If so, how are we going to do it? If not, why not? Those kinds of things. And Kimberly, if you would please bring up the scorecard. Can you read that? Okay. We develop our scorecard. This is kind of how Human Resources does all of its scorecards. We have a couple of distinct areas that we like to focus on. We've got some aspects of it that are non-negotiable. If you can't do this, we're not interested. And then we've got other areas that, well, if you do this, what's the quality of what you're doing, and that kind of thing, and then we go through and score it. That's the kind of thing, hopefully, whenever we get the vendors to come in, we would come through and we would articulate, like in an RFP, we'd say, on the non-negotiable, you must have experience in staffing studies and organizational design surveys. That's a given. If you're brand new out of the box, I'm not interested. Experience in developing classification systems, compensation studies, and must provide evidence of high-quality customer service. I'm not interested in somebody that won't return phone calls. I mean, nowadays, all you got to do is pick up the phone and hit a few buttons and you talk to me. Must provide evidence that the firm has a client base that includes municipalities and other entities that are the city's size or larger. Because if I did a staffing study for the daycare center down the street, that doesn't do me any good. I need something that's more our size. Proof of insurance that meets the city's requirements. Disclose any mitigation solutions for conflicts of interest or indicate no conflicts exist. I want to know, like, if somebody has, a financial interest in something that they're going to be recommending that's outside, like a third-party tool, that kind of thing, and so on. And then I want to see evidence of studies completed 1 year ago, 3 years ago, and 5 years ago. I want to see that time frame, because then I would want to contact those municipalities or those entities or whatever and say, how'd they do? How would you do them again? Would you use these folks again? And that's, especially, if you had really bad service, you'll know real quick. And so that's why I want those in 2021 and 2019 and 2017. And the other elements you see there is, things like favorable references by clients, evidence of timely communication. You know, give us an example of what your communication style looks like. Because ultimately, we want to be communicating not only to my department, but to this body as well. Because we will have follow-up meetings. Hopefully, we can have them address this panel in subsequent HR committee meetings. Say, this is how it's going, and this is the information we need, and so on. And the one thing that, you know, when we go through and do the initial screening of any kind of RFQ or RFP, you know, a lot of times vendors will just take a boilerplate submission and turn it in. No, I want you to read ours, and I want you to answer it, every question. If you don't, you're going to score poorly, that kind of thing. And then give us any additional good-to-know information, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of information here that we're going to be looking at. We will do an evaluation on that. My department will score this and make a recommendation to you. You may look at it once the vendors provide their input. You may go, okay, I agree with that. Or you might go, nah, I don't agree with this. I think they did differently.
You going to do a bidders conference on this where you can talk to them directly and say the same things that you've told the mayor and the rest of us?
I'll leave that up to our purchasing agent. If I sign in here, can we do that?
That's,
Yeah.
well, I think you need to be telling them, you know, obviously how you're going to score and to level the playing field and flat out say, you know, you don't respond to these things, you're not going to be considered.
I'm open to it.
Okay.
Jan, I believe that all the members on this committee have read through the documents. When I read through this, I'm going to tell you, I thought it was just spot on. I don't know if there's any other comments from others, any suggested changes to what Jan is suggesting?
Yeah, the issue that you referred to was the positive referral from other entities. And that's where the proof's in the pudding.
Oh, absolutely.
You did that. How good a job did you do? And would you hire them back again?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know those vendors that you've hired, you go, man, I'm not going to do that again.
Yeah.
I think I would almost argue, though, that number 8 there, provided a complete RFQ submission, should be maybe up at the top of non-negotiable. Because if they're not completing a complete submission, I don't know that I would want their staffing study, but.
Easy enough.
That's usually the golden rule there. You didn't follow the rules?
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes you will get quality submissions from folks that have a pending deadline and they didn't realize it was out there, that it was available, and they just throw something together. And that happens. And I tend to not want to box them out completely sometimes. I want to be able to evaluate what they've got. But we can do it however we'll have plenty of lead time on this. I think we've talked about having it out there for at least, 4 weeks?
I have it on the top of this last one.
Do you have a professional organization that you are a part of that deals with entities like this on an ongoing basis? I know we in the employment training side know who the employment training providers are, and it's discussed on an ongoing basis. I was just going to
I'm on, first name basis on a listserv with a boatload of HR directors throughout the Midwest. So yeah, I talk to people. A lot of them are in the Kansas City area, and they have a lot more money to spend on stuff like this. So they give me good input.
So realistically, what time frame are we looking at here? It's going to be out to bid for 4 weeks.
Well, one of the issues is going to be the timing of getting everything done. We need to make sure that we can start doing some actual groundwork. Once we award this, we need folks to start, putting things together. A lot of it's going to depend on getting approval by the board and all that. And once that hits, hopefully, I would ideally like to be able to wrap everything up by August at a worst-case scenario, but preferably by June. I'm going to push for June.
We have the outline of our projected dates up above there.
Where's it at? Oh, I'm sorry, okay.
So I think one of the questions was, what is it that you need and what's the time frame to put the RFQ out?
If we're good to go with this right now, we'll take it out
Okay.
ASAP.
I think
Another
that's
thing that
important.
we need is on the score sheet, if I can work this appropriately. On the score sheet, we have this weight column. I think that we were hoping to have your input on what the weight should be for each of these items.
That's one of those that I think we can come up with that ourselves. And, but I guess ideally, if in a worst-case scenario for right now, if you see something, I would have a tendency to put it in order, though have the weighting in order. So have, a weight of 1 to 10. I'd start out the very first one, I'd have that at 10. And then I'd work my way down. And some of those would be 8s or 9s and so on. Several of them would be. But, meeting the proposed deadline, that's one that probably is going to have to be higher up. So in that respect, if you see something other than that that's out of place, let me know, and we'll.
Are you looking at weighting the categories, like negotiable is 25% of the total score, and I can't see what the others are, and you may have one that's rated as a category 30%?
No, the non-negotiable, if I check no in any one of those, you're out. If you can't do those things, sorry, we're done. Presuming you can do all of those things, because that's all we're interested in, is an entity that can do all of those things, then I would weight everything here. So obviously, we've got 16 different items in here. They're going to have various weights, so you may have a total score. If everybody hits a home run on everything, 550, 600 might be the total score.
Jan, what I would request is, this is in your wheelhouse. I would ask that you provide what your suggested weighting is. And
Okay.
then maybe we could look at it at the next meeting.
Okay.
I think it'd be more prudent for us to respond to what you're recommending.
Okay, so that way, whenever we do start seeing the vendors and things like that, you can look at this and say, I like what you did here, but here we need to
Yeah.
tweak this. Okay, sure, good enough.
And I think at our next meeting, we will be choosing, basically, that our hope is that we'll be choosing which vendor to use.
That'd be great.
Okay. All right, so before we close this up,
Give me a second. In an effort of saving time, would we want to have a special meeting just for that, so we don't have to wait a month to move on?
Well, the struggle we have is to get that RFQ out and give enough time to get submissions.
Oh,
It
I'm
will
sorry.
probably take about
I
a
stand
month.
corrected. Yep, thank you.
Are you looking for a motion out of us to approve this scoring schedule?
I would, and the elements that make up the context of the study.
Thank you for asking that.
I would make that, sir.
Second? Anybody second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor of approving this as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Go, Jan, go.
Okay. I believe I don't have any reports, and we're not going to do a safety report today, and I believe that's all I have.
Is this where we bring in the food that gives us the positive reinforcement to serve on this committee? Is that-
Absolutely.
Okay.
Jan, I've tried explaining this to Bill. Would you explain to him, ribs are not in the budget?
Okay.
Oh, what do I do with what I've got?
We have Peter Pan food, like the Lost Boys used to eat.
Teddy Grahams, is that what it is?
So is that,
Motion to adjourn, sir.
yeah,
I've got a quick comment. Stan, because I think it's important, and, maybe I just need some knowledge. You mentioned earlier you didn't budget for this study.
Right.
Now we're talking about 4 weeks from now, having people come in to give us a presentation on this. What are we going to do then? Award a bid or take pricing then to the board and say, hey, we've got this company, we're really excited about doing this study. It's $75,000.
There's a
And we
couple
wait.
things, that have to occur. First and foremost, Jamie is going to have to start identifying some funds out of a budget from somewhere. The RFQ, once approved, that's when we can then go back and negotiate a price. Once that price is negotiated, then it has to go back to the board for a budget amendment to get that done. And quite frankly, it is why the timeline that was set forth is probably, to be blunt, aggressive, because it will take considerable time to get at least 4 weeks to get the RFQ back, and then time to bring it back to you all, and then time to take it to the board, and then time to find the funds. And I was worried that Jan didn't bring any medicine for Jamie to this meeting, but you are correct. There will be a necessity to find the funds, and that's a key issue. But I don't think it should be an issue that should stop us from getting this done.
I agree completely. I'm sitting here through this whole meeting thinking about the business I run at Dolly Parton Stampede, and comparable employee size, different businesses altogether. Would love to have information like we're going to receive from this company, but would scare me to death to have that information and what it says. Because now, if my employees know what this information says, and I'm financially not able to live up to it, what does that do for my employee base? That scares me.
You are 100% correct, and I will tell you that, just for general knowledge, we have a group right now that is focused on the financial side of life, on what we as a city need to do financially to be able to afford to continue to do business.
Sure.
And the mayor has stated several times, we're going to have to make some tough decisions as a city. It's what this, what does the community want as a city?
Yeah.
We are even in more of a difficult, I don't mean this in a bad way, but even more of a difficult position than you are, because you're a private entity and you have the opportunity to raise ticket prices, possibly.
Sure.
We don't have that opportunity without going back to our voters and asking.
Yeah.
So I believe me, I have had some sleepless nights lately on this very topic.
And I'll agree with you. I'll also share that when I look at the big picture, our payroll is north of $10 million a year. The cost of doing a study like this, I'm going to say the quality of the information we receive to make more informed decisions is of paramount importance, much more important than if this bidder is $10,000 more or less than this one. And I don't want to say it was a knee-jerk reaction, but at a previous meeting, because of inflation and things, I don't want to say it was knee-jerk, but we approved the 4% and 7% increase. We did that out of need with not much information, but that number exceeds $1 million a year. So we made $1 million a year decision on payroll with not much information to go on. So the importance of this study, I think I place a very high level of what this study provides us so we can make more informed decisions.
Well, and I think it's important to remember too, what we're looking at just isn't a monetary reward to employees. We're looking at more flexibility. We're looking at other things that can make their job more enjoyable than just paying them more. So I think upfront communication of, we will have to work on the budget. We'll have to figure out how we're going to be able to achieve what we want to achieve. But here are some things that we can do for you in the meantime is going to be a huge conversation that we have to have.
That's an excellent point, because yes, we agree that obviously the dollars and cents is extremely important. But the morale, there's other issues involved with what we want to get from this study, other than just dollars and cents.
There may be a lot of changes we can make that don't cost a dime.
Well,
right.
and if we do a study, let's say we have positions that are currently frozen, maybe there are things that we don't fill. Maybe we don't want to certainly fire anyone. We don't want anyone to lose their jobs. But we're going to have turnover, and through attrition, we can find savings. So there are ways. You just have to be creative. You have to look for them. And then, of course, you always have the priority-based budgeting. So we have a lot of tools at our disposal if we want to achieve this. It's just going to take a lot of work.
And again, from my business experience, I fully anticipate hearing some real pearls from the employee base of the city of what they see that would be beneficial. I think there's a lot of wisdom out there.
There's a motion on the floor
Yeah.
from Stan
We
to
have a-
adjourn. I second.
There's no other questions? Motion to adjourn.
Made.
Stan, are you getting ready to say yes, or did you want to make another
I'm
comment?
just getting ready to say yes.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Ayes have it. Thank you.
Thank you.